Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you're just joining us, we're going to wait for others. We're going to give them maybe 2-3 minutes more, and then we'll start the morning school. Again, good morning, folks. If you're just joining us, we're going to wait maybe 2 more minutes, and then we'll start. And Joe, I want to make sure I'm not mispronouncing your name. It's Geisel, correct? All right, good morning. I think we are going to start. Good morning, everybody. My name is Luigi Del Puerta. I'm the publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. The Arizona Capital Times, of course, covers state government and public policy and politics. And if you don't have a subscription, let me know. I'll get you squared away. As you know, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation recently announced a first ever Tier 1 shortage for Colorado River operations in 2022. For our state, that means a substantial cut in our water allocation, and Central Arizona agricultural users will bear the brunt of those cuts. We have a great subject this morning, but first, I want to thank our sponsors for engaging with us this way and allowing us to hold important public policy forums like the one we are having today. I want to thank the Central Arizona Project. The 336-mile long CAP is a monumental, or rather is a monument to long-term thinking in Arizona. In the early 20th century, Arizona's leaders knew the state's future depended on a water supply that is secure, stable, and renewable. And they pursued that vision, and today the canal delivers Colorado River water to central and southern Arizona, and it's the state's single largest source of water supply, serving 80% of our population. Again, thank the CAP. The Salt River Project provides reliable, affordable water and power to more than 2 million people in a 2,900 square mile service area that spans 3 Arizona counties, including most of the Phoenix metro area. SRP's water business is one of the largest raw water suppliers in the state, delivering about 800,000 acre feet of water annually to, as I mentioned, 375 square mile service area And SRP also manages a 13,000 square mile watershed that includes an extensive system of reservoirs, wells, canals, and irrigation laterals. Again, I want to thank the SRP for sponsoring. And finally, EPCOR USA is also our sponsor this morning. EPCOR, the parent company, started 125 years ago in Edmonton, Canada, as the first municipality owned electric utility, and 10 years later as Edmonton's water utility. Today, it is one of the largest private utilities in the Southwest. EPCOR, of course, provides clean water, wastewater, and drainage services and energy to more than 2 million customers in the US and in Canada. EPCOR USA, for example, provides water and wastewater services to over 360,000 people in 37 communities and 15 counties across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Again, I want to thank EPCOR for sponsoring today's morning scoop. I also want to welcome Terry Gardner this morning. Terry is the board president of the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. Terry served as mayor of Phoenix from 1984 to 1990 and as the Arizona Attorney General from 2003 to 2011. And Terry will give today's intro remarks.
Thank you, Luigi. On behalf of CAP, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this morning scoop and applaud you for your interest in Arizona water. This is the second morning scoop on water this year, which I think says a lot about how important and how vital this particular topic is to people of Arizona. As Luigi said, it's been almost a month since, as we expected, the US Secretary of the Interior declared the first ever Tier 1 shortage on the Colorado River. That decision means a cut of 512,000 acre feet to Arizona's share of the Colorado River, about 30% of the total amount that has been imported by the Central Arizona Project for many years. But despite the national headlines and what that might have led you to believe, we anticipated this announcement for years. And this panel, I know, will talk somewhat about the planning that's gone into being ready for the Tier 1 announcement and the Tier 1 cutbacks. We were prepared, as evidenced by the teamwork involved in passing the drought contingency plan 2.5 years ago. We know how to handle serious water shortages. We pull together and find answers. Actually, there's a victory to be celebrated. It's a small one, but I think it's important because of the DCP. We were able to stay out of shortage for about 3 years. It would have happened much sooner than it actually did had it not been for the teamwork here in Arizona. The good news for Central Arizona cities is that municipal water supplies will not be directly impacted from a Tier 1 shortage. Cities and tribes who have the highest priority water in the CAP system will be okay. However, there is much less water available for Central Arizona agricultural users. But let me emphasize, we're not out of the woods. Behind me is a picture of Lake Mead, simply as a reminder that this bathtub ring shows that the Great Lake that we depend on for stable water supplies on the Colorado River is still declining. And that is something that we need to deal with. We can't continue to treat water as we have for decades and still expect to come out okay. This is a serious situation, and serious situations call for serious solutions. I believe today's panel will be outlining some of those serious solutions, which we are going to have to deal with here in Arizona and throughout the Colorado Basin in the immediate future. Thank you very much for attending this forum and your interest in Arizona water.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate the welcome remarks and setting the tone for today's discussion. We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is Joe Geisel, who is the president of EPCOR USA. In this role, Joe is responsible for water operations in the United States. He is also responsible for EPCOR USA's growing investment and presence in the southwestern United States. Prior to this assignment, Joe served as senior vice president, new business enterprises with EUI. Before rejoining EUI in the year 2000, Joe was director of wholesale and commercial markets at ENCOR Energy Solutions, LP, which is EPCOR's joint venture with Engage Energy, providing transitional consulting services in deregulating markets, including Alberta, Ontario, and California. Joe serves on the advisory board of the Arizona State University's Kyle Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute, and he is a member of the External Advisory Committee of the Water Resources Research Council at the University of Arizona, as well as the University of Arizona's Water, Environment, Environmental and Energy Solutions External Advisory Board. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. A little challenge on the meeting there. Pleasure to be here, and I appreciate being part of this.
Thank you, Joe. And also joining us this morning is Tom Bushasky, who is the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Tom, of course, has more than 30 years of experience in water management. He is responsible for management of the state's water supplies, including multiple planning and policy, regulatory and permitting programs dedicated to that mission exactly. Tom serves as Arizona's principal negotiator on matters relating to the Colorado River. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Luigi. Glad to be here.
And also finally joining us this morning is Ted Cook, who's the general manager of the Central Arizona Project. Previously, Ted served as the deputy general manager, finance and administration, responsible for finance, accounting, risk management, supply chain, and facilities management, information technology, environmental compliance, health and safety, and protective services. He joined CAP in 1999. Ted, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Again, broadly speaking, we will talk about the Tier 1 declaration and what that means for Arizona. I will talk about long-term conservation efforts and, of course, assurances to residential users that Tier 1, as Terry mentioned earlier, does not mean a cut to their water supply, but that they should, like others, do their part in conserving water. All right, let me start with Tom. Tom, when did you see that Tier 1 declaration was coming? When did it become certain to you?
So Luigi, we track the Bureau of Reclamation's modeling monthly. We knew with almost 100% certainty in April that this Tier 1 was coming. The formal declaration again was on August 16th, but we knew this was coming. And as President Gardner talked about earlier, we are very prepared to deal with this level of shortage. But as he also mentioned, we need to be vigilant about doing more, and hopefully we'll talk a lot about that a little bit later.
Ted, did this, we've been hearing about this and we anticipated that this is going to happen. But when it actually did happen, it was still a shock to me. I was like, well, it's actually now, this is happening, this is going on. I wonder if you had that same kind of a reaction.
Well, I think everybody still had a little bit of that same kind of reaction because moving into a Tier 1 shortage is not good news. It is not good news. But like Tom said, we had advance notice, if you will, even in 2021, starting in about April, that gave us the rest of the year to make sure that all the pieces that we had put in place as part of the drought contingency plan were going to work as planned once we hit 2022. And even before that, as we were putting the drought contingency plan together in 2016 through 2019 timeframe, one of the things that allowed us to do was have some definition with certainty that when these milestones occur, such as Tier 1, Tier 2, that we knew in advance who it was going to impact, by how much, and put programs in place to mitigate and things like that. So that does not eliminate the bad news. It does not eliminate this kind of shock that you referred to that everyone's experiencing. Is this really happening? Yes, it's really happening, but it wasn't a sudden thing that today we were oblivious and tomorrow all of a sudden we have to deal with this. We had lots of time to prepare for it.
Joe, I want to ask you, because I think as everybody mentioned, residential users, utility companies such as yours aren't immediately affected by this Tier 1 declaration. In any case, everyone kind of knew that this was coming. It is here now. Talk to us a little bit about how you were anticipating this, how you were planning for, the eventuality, the inevitable that this will happen this year.
Yeah, as Ted said, it's not a good situation. I think we saw it coming. We tried to prepare as best we can. I think a couple of comments with regards to that. Each municipal and utility provider probably finds himself in a little bit different perspective, albeit in a good short-term perspective. For example, EPCOR, our CAP allocation accounts for less than 10% of our capacity to supply water infrastructure. So for us, very disappointing that that's under pressure, but the immediate implications for us are not there. We've done a lot of work with regards to making sure the infrastructure is sound and that we can actually manage through any call down or shortage that would come to us. So the good part is we've been doing a lot of planning, and I think we're in a good spot in the short term. The bad news is we're in a good spot short term. And what we need to think about now is, while we're looking at the supply side, but there's also the demand side. And like a lot of people, unless there's a signal, an economic indication right now, there is none. There's no shortage for municipal users or any supply. People, while they will say, oh, this is tragic, I don't see a lot of people changing their habits. And that is going to be key for us going forward on how we manage not just the supply side, but the demand side itself.
Now, I want to flesh it out a little bit. When you say that there's no economic signal, you're really talking about pricing here, right? When people look at their bills and they're the same, they may say instinctively, yeah, of course, I'm going to conserve water, but their behavior actually doesn't change. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. I think everybody, both on the panel and on the call and listening in, hasn't seen any dramatic change to their water pricing and their water bills in the last year or so, other than say a normal or a modest increase by their provider. So while we're losing, a large portion of the CAP allocation, it doesn't affect municipal industrial users. So there is no economic signal to them to adjust behavior. And that, you can call that right or wrong. I'm not going to opine on what that should be, but that is the reality of what we're seeing. So it's just a fact. So what we need to do is look at what we can do with our customers to provide incentives on how we can reduce consumption. And that's easy to say as opposed to getting through.
Right. And Ted, I want to just follow up on what Joe said. From your perspective, I do wonder if it's time for an economic signal.
Well, Joe didn't go all the way there, and I respect him for that, because it kind of puts words in other people's mouths as far as the elasticity of water prices. And I believe that water prices up to a point are fairly inelastic, meaning that most folks have, except for those probably who can least afford it, have probably little behavioral reaction to higher prices for quite an extent. And so we'll see. And one of the difficulties with that, I'm not really answering your question, I'll try and get to that. One of the difficulties with that is, as Joe said, is that CAP water in particular is not the sole source for many of our users. They've got other sources. They've got Salt River Project potentially. They may be using groundwater. They may have recovered water that they're using to reuse water. And so even if CAP were to, let's say, decide to impose a surcharge of some large amount, it would be diluted by all of these other resources. Second, we're not allowed to do that. Our water is based on cost of service, and so we try to keep our costs as low as possible. And we're not allowed, basically, under our contracts to do something like that. And I think the outcome is doubtful whether or not that would actually have the desired effect. That being said, as the CAP water supply shrinks, and as President Goddard said, this tier 1 is 512,000 acre-foot reduction. It's about 30% of the normal CAP supply. And because our rates are based on the cost of service, if our delivery supply decreases, the price per unit is going to go up to everybody. So there is kind of a built-in price signal. And as it turns out, going from tier 0, which is 192,000 acre feet, to tier 1 is the largest single increment, 320,000 acre feet of any of the tiers. And so the biggest price jump is going to happen right up front. It's just the way it happens, but it may be fortuitous that, to the extent that there is a price signal, the biggest one is happening at the very beginning of what may be a rather quick step to tier 2 in the next couple of years, and tier 3 the next couple of years after that.
I want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. You're saying that already built into the system is a potential, or maybe not even a potential, but a price increase, because as water supply dwindles, then the price per unit increases.
That's right. As far as the CAP water goes, what individual water users that pay the CAP rate to CAP do in their pricing strategy or regime, or whatever is approved by the ACC in the case of a private water company, is up to them, and it's going to be different for every single one. So there's no formula to say if the CAP price is going to go up by 35%, then this is what's going to happen for our water users. There's no way to predict that on an individual basis.
Thank you, Ted. Tom, I want to go to you. So, what we know, what we're hearing, what we're seeing in the news is that the folks that are directly affected or immediately affected are agricultural users in Pinal County. Talk to us about what this means for them.
So it means, Luigi, that they're going to have to reduce the number of agricultural acres they're farming. As we work through the drought contingency plan inside of Arizona, they estimated that 30 to 40% of their farmland would have to be fallowed, even with the partial mitigation plan that we put in place, which included money for groundwater infrastructure and efficiency from the state coffers. And there were some changes this past year to that program in terms of the money that was going to come potentially out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So there are resources available to those folks for the purposes that I mentioned, but they'll not be able to continue to farm at the levels that they farmed historically in Pinal County or on other farms within the CAP service area, whose water is also being reduced because of the tier 1 shortage.
So allowing what 30%, at least 30% of your land to go fallow, for example, is gonna will mean a great economic hit to obviously the farmers over there. What are their options? Could they, realistically, practically speaking, could they get water from another source and continue to farm at the same level that they had been farming?
So under the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, the farmers have a right to pump groundwater. Conservation programs are mandated for those farmers with increasing conservation requirements in each management plan over a 5-year or 5 management plans span over 25 years. But even with that ability to pump more groundwater than they did use historically when they were using CAP water, in discussions with the agricultural community, they're not going to be able to farm at the same levels for a whole variety of reasons. Part of it is the groundwater doesn't have the same ability in terms of the head, the water pressure, so to speak, that they can use to move that water across their fields, so they can't farm as efficiently. There are areas where they're just not going to be able to get water at all to some of the farmers who used to get CAP water. There's a whole variety of factors. And it's not just the farmers themselves that will feel the economic hardship. Of course, there's trickle-down impacts in the farming agribusiness, the suppliers, fuel, all those things that go into an agricultural operation. Those folks are going to be losing revenue as well because of the reduction in farming that's going to occur as a result of these tier 1 shortages. And I think we're going to see a major shift in how farming occurs in Pinal County and elsewhere within the CAP service area. As a result of this, they're not going to go back to the days when they had plentiful CAP water. How big that shift is going to be is really not something that I'm aware of at this point in time. But again, in talking with the ag community, they tell us that the world is going to change in a permanent way for them after this tier 1 shortage goes away, or after whatever tier we're in ends up going away, Lake Mead and Powell recover, and we have essentially full supplies again for the CAP.
Thank you for that, Tom. Joe, you mentioned that you're only getting 10% of your water supply from the canal. Can you tell us where the rest of your water supply comes from?
Yeah, sure. So we have other surface water supplies through NMWD, We have a very large groundwater positions, as a lot of utilities have right now, where we do extensive groundwater pumping to serve our areas. And then we also do a lot of reclaimed, reuse, recycle from our wastewater treatment plants. Probably about 15 million gallons a day is recycled from our wastewater treatment plants. And as our wastewater business continues to grow, more and more will recycle. So that's the area where we focus on in terms of our resources at this time.
Obviously, Arizona continues to be a growth state. You know, we're getting a ton of people. A ton of people are moving to Arizona, you know, every single year. That's why it was such a big surprise that we didn't get a 10th congressional district in Arizona. I think everybody kind of anticipated with this kind of growth we would get one, but we are getting, you know, we are a growth state driven by population growth, for example. When you're looking at your water supply and the potential growth in your customers, where does that put you?
That's a very good question. We do a 30-year water supply and demand forecast on what we see coming to our areas that we offer in. And at this point in time, if you look out 25 to 30 years, we do have adequate supplies based on today's fundamentals, i.e. if we don't lose any more CAP, if everything else, we are in good shape. But the other thing we are looking at is new water resources to augment any changes in our existing supply sources. So, you know, for example, there's a lot of talk about, moving water from where it is to where it needs to be. For example, the Harquahela is a topical groundwater resource that is talked about either accessing through CAP Canal to serve certain areas or direct pipelining it to it. Our company has quite an expansive P3 and contracted business in Texas, where we do a lot of water pipelining work to relocate water from where it is to where it needs to be in terms of growth. So we're looking at that as well. And then there's other things with regards to other larger infrastructure, which might be a desal plant or brackish or other reuse that we can look at. The challenge that you have on these, as well as conveyancing types of projects, these are very, very, very long gestational period types of projects. For example, it took 10 years to permit the first desal plant on the California coast. Now, California is a different type of state in and of itself, but that gives you the idea of the complexity when you start talking about these large, I'll call them new water sources that we probably need to start looking at.
Thank you, Joe. On that note, Tom, we've talked about desalination. We've talked about finding ways to maybe, have a cooperation with California, for example, so that if they're using, if they're doing desal, then maybe their water allocation, or they won't need as much water from the Colorado River, and then there's going to be a bit of an exchange there. So we, we'll pay somewhat. It's going to be a cost to us, but it increases or stabilizes our water supply. I want to talk to you about long-term projects. And, what really struck me about this Tier 1 declaration is how quickly it's happening. And correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that Tier 2 and Tier 3 are going to happen just as quickly. But tell us about one or two long-term projects that you're working on. And I guess the more important question is, I guess the answer is yes. Do we need to accelerate, those projects?
So Luigi, I'll say this, that one of the many benefits of the drought contingency plan that people might not know about is this last legislative session, the legislature created a drought mitigation fund and a board to manage that fund. And it's all about long-term water augmentation and bringing new water supplies into the state of Arizona. Right now, DWR and CAP, along with Southern Nevada Water Authority, are working with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California on a program in which they might start reusing reclaimed wastewater in their service area, freeing up some of their water for us to use here in Arizona or Nevada in Las Vegas. We've been working since 2018 with Mexico, looking at opportunities for binational desalination in the Sea of Cortez. And Joe mentioned the long gestational period for these things. I am actually the co-chair for the United States delegation, working with the Mexican delegation. There's a published study in June of 2020, a high-level study on something called the International Boundary and Water Commission website that people can look at. So we're pursuing these projects. Those are a couple of examples, as you asked for. And there are these opportunities out there. And again, we need to try to accelerate them as we see the challenges ahead of us on the sustainability of the Colorado River, Lake Powell, and Lake Mead. But there are options out there, and we do need to pursue them, and we are pursuing them. And again, I know on DWR's website and I know on CAP's website, much of this information is available to those who really want more detail that we don't have time to go over today.
This agreement or this project that we have with Mexico, what is it exactly? And in terms of time frame, what are we looking at? In terms of infrastructure cost, what are we looking at?
So in terms of the time frame, it's still uncertain when a plant might be built if we continue to go down this path, but it's probably about 10 years away. The cost estimates that are in the June 2020 plan range from something like $2,250 an acre foot to about $2,500 an acre foot. If the delivery is by exchange, so again, we take some of Mexico's water, perhaps through the CAP, and they use the desalinated water in Mexico. So it's not really cost prohibitive. We have a lot of environmental and legal issues and other things to work through with Mexico, as well as comparing the potential desalination projects with other new water use projects that are also being worked on by a different group. A projects work group is the name of that group. Again, all pursuant to Minute 323 of the Mexican Water Treaty, that minute being signed in September of 2017. So we have a framework to work with Mexico on these types of projects, to compare all the potential projects and to pick the ones that perhaps have the best bang for the buck or create the biggest benefits. And we're still all working through that process.
Ted, are there any other projects that, or big long-term projects that you're working on aside from, of course, the one that Tom mentioned?
Well, there are literally a plethora of different long-term projects that we could pursue. A very popular idea right now is to import water from, say, the Mississippi River or the Missouri River or the Great Lakes, and those are not, I would say, bad ideas right out of the box, but they're extremely complex and extremely difficult, for not just because of cost, political implications, legal and legislative implications, environmental issues, and things like that, and will take at least as long as a desalination plant to build, and probably even more expensive than that. But it doesn't mean we're just going to say, you know, we're not looking at that. We are looking at that, and some of the things I know that were under consideration when Director Bushatsky talked about funding from the legislature was maybe to do some feasibility studies of things like that. But nearer term, also between now and, Tom mentioned, a desalination plant might take 10 years to get online. So what are we doing in the meantime? There still is lots of room in Arizona and elsewhere in the lower basin, and I think Joe referred to some of this in part of EPCOR's supply, is reusing the wastewater stream from the supply that we have in Arizona. All of the Colorado River water that we bring through the CAP canal, for instance, and I believe all of the SRP water, none of that goes back to the ocean. It is used in Arizona, but a lot of times it's used at maybe the last possible use. It's put into treated water, is put into a riverbed or a stream, which is not a bad thing, but maybe that there are some higher uses that could be used. A lot of the impediment for doing those type of things, besides the cost, is the public perception of direct potable reuse, where here's a wastewater stream, it's being treated and it's put back into the water supply system. We need to get over that. This is a supply that's available to us today at only a little more cost than the cost of the water that we have today, when we're looking at maybe desalination for $2,000 an acre foot, or imported water from the Missouri River at $3,000 or $4,000 an acre foot 10 or 20 years from now. These are things that we can look at right now. We are working on, we as CAP and the Department of Water Resources and other partners, some recycling and reuse project in California with Metropolitan Water District, the Southern Nevada Water Authority, to explore a way to reduce the amount of discharge into the Pacific Ocean by the city of Los Angeles environment. And those type of things are things that we can capitalize on in the near term.
Yeah, it's a psychological barrier, I guess. And Joe can probably talk to, because obviously he's directly working with customers here. The psychological barrier of recycled, reused water, and then putting that into essentially that becoming drinking water. I do remember one time there was a beer company that used recycled, reused water, and there was and everybody seemed to enjoy it, but obviously it's a psychological barrier. Joe, can you talk to us about the infrastructure problems that we have currently in your case, but I guess for the state, in terms of water leakage, infrastructure damage, old pipes and as such. If you're looking at our infrastructure, just broadly speaking, where are we at? And in really, I guess the other question is long term, how much investment or focus should we have on just making sure that the infrastructure is not actually leaking as much water as it is right now?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the approach that a lot of water providers and utilities take is a gallon that's lost is another gallon that has to be replaced. And so the less leakage we have, obviously the better the infrastructure is. For example, our company is regulated by the ACC here in Arizona, who've set a minimum of no less than 10% down to 5% of losses. So our utility infrastructure has to meet those requirements in order to meet the requirements of the ACC. So we probably spend in excess of $40 to $50 million a year just in our properties here on making sure that infrastructure is of a good quality. The leaks are not massive; they still will occur, and obviously you're reinvesting in our plants to make sure they're compliant, so that when we have wastewater, we can retreat it for reuse, recycle, and regeneration. So we do spend a lot of time. The nation and as a whole, you can quote all the stats that come out from the Corps of Engineers or the American Water Society. They get a D for infrastructure. One of the benefits of Arizona is that we're a relatively young state. So a lot of the problems that are facing other states, where they have large troubles with regards to their infrastructure, aren't as prevalent here, but we still need to keep reinvesting in our infrastructure to make sure those leakages don't happen and that we have good quality infrastructure here.
Thank you, Joe. Tom, I want to ask you about the potential, the possibility, or perhaps the inevitability of water in Lake Mead falling below 1030, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, just the potential of that triggers negotiation to mitigate the issue. Talk to us about what's happening there.
So Luigi, built into the drought contingency plan was an adaptive management trigger that if any one of the Bureau of Reclamation's monthly 24-month study projects at a low level, the 10th percentile of hydrology essentially, Lake Mead falling below elevation 1030 2 years out in time, then consultation is triggered between Arizona, California, Nevada, and the Department of Interior. The August 24-month study on August 16th did show that the lake would fall below 1030 in July of 2023. That did trigger that consultation provision. The 3 states have begun to meet pursuant to that consultation provision. We've had discussions with Interior as well. But what it means is, despite the fact that the drought contingency plan has done all of the good things we've talked about, the good things that President Goddard talked about, we need to do more. We need to be doing more to protect Lake Mead. And that means you have 2 choices. You can cut your demand through mandatory reductions, more shortages, or we can find ways to conserve more water and keep it in Lake Mead. And we're looking at both of those things. But I also don't want to forget about Lake Powell. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are obviously connected. We try to balance the contents of Lake Powell and Lake Mead under various agreements, the law of the river, so to speak. And so we need Lake Powell to be healthy as well. And starting at the end of July, under the Upper Basin's Drought Contingency Plan, the Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado plan, they're moving water from reservoirs above Lake Powell between July and December of this year into Lake Powell to help protect Lake Powell, and especially the ability for Lake Powell to produce hydropower, which is another one of the many tentacles here that is in play with these reductions in supply. And we haven't talked much about that, but hydropower is an important part of the Western grid. And reductions in that hydropower production will have ramifications economically as well. So all of those things need to be done. The short story is we need to do more, and we're working towards that end.
And Ted, when we talk about potential negotiation with the states, we're talking about the lower basin states under the 1030 kind of requirement, correct? Ted, you're muted.
Sorry about that. The provision that Tom was talking about, the 1030 consultation, is in the lower basin drought operations agreement, or LBOPS for short. So yes, that's among the 3 lower basin states and the United States to do that. So yes, those will be the parties that are involved in those discussions. And I might point out too, as Tom was referring to, the 10th percentile, and whenever elevation 1030 shows up in that 10th percentile, meaning 90% of the cases are better than that. And so it's a pretty conservative estimate. If we see 1030 show up anytime in the next 2 years, even after taking into account implementation of tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 when the lake reaches those levels, then that's what triggers needing to do something more. So this is a pretty dire time, even on top of we're doing tier 1 for the first time, and we expect tier 2 and tier 3 to come in the next several years. We have to do this additional thing, and it doesn't come at the end of tier 2 and tier 3. It comes as soon as we can do it. So we're working very hard on what is the additional amount that we need to do that will be inserted into the tiers, whether we're still in tier 1 or already in tier 2, as soon as we can put something together. And Tom put it correctly, is there's more than one way to do it, but some are probably less draconian than others. The United States is the states are not going to allow the Lake Mead to go into Deadpool, and because that would truly be a disaster of many proportions. So how do you prevent doing that? As Tom said, on the one end, there could be mandatory cutbacks, the things that so far we have avoided doing, which is things like we've seen before elsewhere, like you can't wash your car, or you're not allowed to water your lawn except on Sunday, or things like that. Or we can find voluntary ways to do these things and agree with each other that we're going to do it. It's going to require money to do that, but that's another path that will be more akin to what we've done under DCP, which is to get everyone to agree what needs to be done, bring all the resources together, and everybody involved to make sure that the plan works the way that it's supposed to.
I want to
Luigi,
I
want to jump in because I don't want this point to be lost. So in the Upper Basin States drought plan, and I described water moving into Lake Powell, there is a requirement among the 7 states when that drought operation agreement is triggered that there be consultation among all 7 states. So again, we're joined at the hip with all 7 states about all the actions we take. And we will be talking with the Upper Basin as well about the potential actions we're going to take under the 1030 consultation provision. So none of this is being done in a vacuum or without the full knowledge and kind of participation among all 7 states, either their drought contingency plan or ours in the lower basin.
Thank you for that context and clarification, Tom. Joe, you've heard Ted and Tom talk about the 2 pathways for us. One is mandatory drastic reductions, and the other one is kind of voluntary, in which we, as residents, water users, take a bit of the pain, and that provides us with some kind of long-term sustainability. What can residential users like me do at this moment? And I think you talked about it at the very beginning. Right now, we don't have an economic signal, but what can we do, and what should we do right now?
So I think there's a couple of things that, customers can do, and some of this is voluntary and some could be mandatory depending on the regulator, whether it's the ACC for the state or whether it's a municipality like the city of Phoenix or whatever. Obviously, outside consumption of the home is about 70% of your consumption. So you'll see some cities, the state of Nevada, for Las Vegas, have de-turfing programs where you actually pay people to take their turf out. There's other areas where they, we have low flush, low use products for the home that we subsidize. And there's all sorts of different things where we can squeeze the towel, so to speak. Some of that has already been done with the more efficient appliances that you're seeing in the market as the stock trades over in the homes. So we are seeing it start to come down, those types of things. And then you can look to regulation as well. The state of California mandated in 2017-18 when they had a shortage that, consumption had to be reduced by 15 or 20% depending where you were. So there are those, there's a carrot and there's a stick. I guess I'd leave it to the viewers or to people smarter than me to see which one would be best as opposed to the other thing. Just one other thing, I've been sort of eyeing some of the commentary coming in from people in the crowd, and thanks very much for all of your comments. There's a couple of themes that as I read through this, there's the transition of the farm and the importance of food and all that kind of thing that is potentially impacted with the call down and the loss of water for farmers from the CAP. The transition from farm to rooftops is not new. This has been happening over the last 10 to 20 years. I mean, Tom can show you charts of how the water consumption in the state has declined as this whole trend has gone from agriculture to urban. This is a great state. People want to move here. It's a great economy. People want to move here. We're now in a position where that may not be all voluntary. And that's what we're seeing, where people are going to have to make some hard decisions, and that will have repercussions. There's no question that will have repercussions. And whether it's in the price of food or the economy in general, there will be, you can expect repercussions. The other thing that's coming through is what businesses or why are we allowing this to happen in terms of people moving here, new industries, what's happening. Economic development for this state is a priority by the current governor. They've been very, very successful in attracting new industries, which drive employment and people moving here. I think the thing we have to focus on is that those new industries coming here, how efficient will they be? And what do we need to do as an industry to make sure that when they're using water, is it used to the best of its ability? Is it recycle, regenerate, all those kind of things? You have Intel here, which are award-winning for their water and what they're doing there. We got a new manufacturer coming here called TSMC, very large chip production. If I could see north of my office here, I could probably see the cranes. A lot of water will be used, but again, very efficiently. We do a lot of work with large industrials on efficient use for recycle and regeneration. Those kind of things will make sure that water users who are coming here will use it properly, will reuse it properly. And, I kind of beg to differ. I don't think that letting it just run on a waste stream out on the surface for evaporation is the best way. We need to make sure every drop that is used is reused. And I think that's a big focus for what we're looking at for our large industrials that are moving to our jurisdictions right now.
So Luigi, I want to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
And the discussion about conservation, et cetera, and I saw some things popping up about California and things like this, but Arizona is the only Colorado Basin state that from a state level has mandatory conservation requirements for municipal, industrial, and agricultural sectors of our water use. And industrial includes golf courses. We've been doing this conservation since 1980 when the Groundwater Management Act was passed. We were way ahead of everyone in the basin in terms of the conservation that we've created throughout all those years. So while perhaps we're not paying folks to take grass out like Las Vegas did, the reductions that we're seeing are just as big as the reductions they saw when that program went in the 2000 timeframe, when their Colorado River allocation of 300,000 acre feet was being exceeded as much as 325,000 acre feet. So they had to do something on a short-term kind of emergency basis. We've taken a different path since 1980 and kind of the tortoise and the hare, and we've been slowly and progressively doing increased conservation over the years. And maybe one is not right and one is not wrong, the short term versus the long term. But I want people to think that Arizona is behind other states in our conservation programs. And yes, there is room for more conservation, but we were leaders in this entire basin in terms of conservation and reuse. We're not following along with others who are showing us the way. We're the ones who showed them the way.
And thank you for that, Tom. And Ted, you were about to jump in. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was. I just wanted to add one thing with respect to something that all three of us have talked about a little bit, and one of my earlier points fits in here again, which is how do we move forward as far as conserving more, augmenting the supply, reuse, and all of those type of things. And we get lots of questions about, well, why isn't somebody doing this? And one of the things that I think I'd like to share and not go into too much detail is that, for instance, I'll just bring up one example. Why are we allowing farms in central Arizona to go out of production while so-and-so else does something else with water? And there is underlying contractual rights and water priorities that have been built over many, many years through laws, contracts, agreements, things like that. And there's no master decision maker that can just say, tomorrow we're going to stop doing this and start doing that types of things. Water is in many instances is a property right that has been in place for decades, if not longer, based on prior appropriation, means who was using it first. And people might not like that today, that there was a prospector that showed up and started farming 100 years ago, 150 years ago, but that's the way that it is. And those things are respected, and it's illegal to take property away from folks. So that's why Tom and I and Joe and all the other folks that are in the business that we're in negotiate the most reasonable outcome that we can. Without, you can't just tear everything down and say, well, let's rebuild everything from scratch. It's not possible to do that. And we do the best that we can within the constraints that exist and respecting the property rights and the businesses and et cetera that have been built for many, many decades in the state.
So Luigi, I want to jump in too and say as well that when folks ask what purpose is me conserving water serving, so folks like Joe and EPCOR, Phoenix, Freeport, McMoran Mining Company, the city of Tucson, and others, because they have unused water, partly because of the conservation that has occurred, they were able to participate in some of those complicated agreements that President Goddard talked about that led to the successful adoption of the drought contingency plan. So this partial mitigation that we created for water users being impacted, like the farmers, is coming from the entities that I mentioned. And they are able to do that because they have more water than they have demand. And a lot of that reason is because of the conservation programs that they put in place over the years, and because the person in the house is using less water than they did 10, 20 years ago. So that is the benefit. You create that flexibility to do creative things and kind of share the pain, so to speak, of some of these cuts. And we are sharing the pain with some of the agricultural users. They're not being cut as much as they would have absent all of these agreements that led to the Arizona Drought Contingency Plan.
What I'm hearing is that there is an array of solutions that we can tap into. And it's not one big answer to this water challenge that we have. And it may be what we're seeing, or what we need to do is provide multiple solutions, a wide array of solutions. And no single solution is going to fix this problem. And maybe one solution is not as good as the other ones, but we need to consider all of them. Joe, in the next, I would say 1 to 2 years, when we're already in tier, we're already in tier 0, we're going to go into tier 1. And I think the expectation is tier 2 and tier 3 are going to happen very fast. What is your expectation from our state leaders? Ted Cook, Tom Bushasky, or the governor, the legislature, the corporation commission?
Well, I'm hopeful that there is true leadership on bringing everybody together to address the issue. As you've heard from the other people on the panel here, and you've stated yourself, this is a very, very complex problem that we're facing. And we need that leadership. We've seen a little bit establishing the fund to look at new water resources, but that's just the start. That's just the start. And we need to understand where that's going to go, whether that's from the state or the federal programs, or whether that's locally our own regulators and municipalities themselves as to what we're going to do. As Tom said, we have some fantastic stuff that we've initiated with the Groundwater Management Act to look at that. As Ted said, CAP are a very efficient group to deliver the resources. We just have to come together to look at new ways to do that, and to be prepared for what that's going to take. I'll give you an example, and people probably don't like to hear this, but new water resources, as have been outlined, are going to cost us more. Now, it's not going to be dollar for dollar, because you have a portfolio of resources, whether it's ground, existing CAP, other resources, but the new water replacing those resources will be much more expensive. We've talked about 2,000 an acre feet to 4,000 an acre feet, all those kind of things, whether delivered, whether we wheel it notionally rather than actually pipeline it here, they will cost more. I'll give you an example of what we're involved with. We're a partner in the largest public-private partnership in North America for water. It's called the Vista Ridge Project. It serves 20% of the city of San Antonio's water. That's 40 million gallons a day of water to the city of San Antonio. It started 8 years ago, and we commissioned it in 2020. That water is about $1,700 an acre foot, probably 10 times what Ted's delivered water is today, but not tomorrow, okay? What the city fathers did in San Antonio is they put on an 8% premium starting 5 years ago to the residential cost of water to prepare everybody, but also to look at funding what was going to happen. In the end, they didn't need it all. It came in less than that. But those are the kind of initiatives that you have to look forward. You either get funding given to you federally or statewide, or you take it from where it's going to be used. And I think that's very painful. It's not lost on us, the cost of water and the people who can or cannot pay. The social good of water is very important, and not everybody can pay for that. So that's going to take huge leadership from our regulators to figure out who pays and how we can afford these things. But that's just the fact of where we're going. And people look at Israel, people look at Singapore for what they've done. They have done a great job. It's not cheap. And if we're going to get behind it out in front of this, we need to look at all of those kind of things. And I don't want to be the purveyor of your costs are going up, but the reality of in a water scarce environment, when you're looking for water, those costs will start to move.
And thank you for that, Joe. I think it's really important to be candid about where we're at and where we're heading, because that's the only way we can honestly prepare for what's coming. And to not expect an increase in water cost, I think is, and I'm probably speaking out of turn, it's probably foolish, because that's probably what's going to happen. And it's important to have that discussion now. I want to go to our audience questions. We don't have a whole lot of time, but this one's probably for Ted and Tom. What's going to happen next? In terms of meetings, consultations, things that you'll have, stakeholder processes that you have to start. Tom?
Again, as I mentioned before, Luigi, we are talking with the other states, especially about the 1030 consultation. We had embarked, Ted and I had embarked a while ago on an Arizona reconsultation committee to have a transparent public process in terms of what the future management of the Colorado River would look like post 2026, when so many of the drought contingency plan and other agreements are set to expire. Ted and I have had multiple public meetings over the years to brief folks about Colorado issues, what we're doing, what the situation is. We will continue to do that on a periodic basis. Again, certainly our websites have more information probably than you ever want to look at in terms of what's going on, what's happening. Great levels of detail there that you can access, presentations, slideshows, and like to say, as many squiggly lines on graphs trying to project out the future through modeling as anybody would want to look at. So there's lots of information out there. There's lots of opportunity, and we will continue that transparent process. We continue to provide information to our stakeholders. We'll work through the processes and where all our stakeholders are in the room, including our legislators, as we work towards finality on all of these issues, both the 1030 consultation process and the post 2026 new set of guidelines, as we call them, process.
Ted, here's a question from, I think it's related to what we talked about, economic signals. And this may be an impossible question, frankly, to answer, but what is your best guess in terms of potential increases in the cost of water, let's say over the next 10 or 20 years?
Okay, I will not answer the question directly, but I will provide enough information for folks to draw their own conclusions. So we've spoken today about longer term augmentation supplies such as desalination or imported surface water from somewhere else in the country being in the thousands of dollars per acre foot. And that is desalination, that's treated water, raw water transported from another area of the country, that's raw water that still needs to be treated. That is in the order of magnitude of at least 10 times more than the cost of, say, CAP water. So put that in perspective. CAP water is being reduced by 30% in a tier 1 and somewhere on the order of 40% in a 40 to 50% in a tier 3. So if we had to replace, just using CAP as an example, half of our water with a new supply that costs 10 times as much, you can do the math. And as Joe said very clearly, people do not want to hear this, but the cost of water is going to go up, and not by a little bit, not by double, but by more than that. It's not going to happen next week or next month or even in 4 or 5 years, but it's going to begin to, and where we're going to end up is water is going to cost a lot more in this area than it does today.
Luigi, I need to jump in, and maybe
Yeah.
Joe can say for EPCOR, but the total cost at the tap, so to speak, has many elements, and the raw water cost percentage of that total cost is a very small percentage of the actual total cost. That includes the salaries of the folks, the infrastructure costs, the treatment costs, the chemicals, all those things that go into delivering clean potable water out of someone's tap. And perhaps, Joe, you can give us an estimate of the percentage of the raw water costs for EPCOR, because it varies for every water provider.
Yeah,
Joe, real quick.
That's very true, Ted. And to give you some notional numbers, and this is where some of the disconnects happen with our tariffs and our rates to customers. About 78% of our costs to deliver water are fixed. Whether I sell you 1 gallon or 1,000 gallon, 78% of that is fixed. It's pipes, it's treatment, it's fixed. So you can tell what the balance of that, the other, 22% is variable costs that are linked to how much water we're actually supplying. So if you get a bill for $100, and I'm not sure if that's your home bill or not, you know how much of that $78 is just to deliver safe, reliable, clean water to your home. infrastructure, pipes, plants, all that kind of good stuff. The other $22 is the variable cost, which isn't just the cost of the water itself. As you know, there's no cost premium to water. That's the chemicals, that's all the other things that are variable in delivering that water. So when you look at that as a portion of your bill, you are right, Tom. It's not 100%. And as I said before, we have a portfolio of resources which feed into that. But in general, that's what it looks like.
And Joe, thank you for that context. Tom, thank you for your time. Ted, thank you for being so generous with your time as well. I think this is a good place to end this discussion. This is not going to be the last discussion we'll have. We'll have more of these because water, of course, is very precious to everybody, but especially to our state. And I want to thank our sponsors again this morning, Central Arizona Project, Salt River Project, SRP, CAP, and of course, EPCOR USA for engaging with us this way. And to our viewers and our listeners, we will post a link to this video between now and first thing tomorrow morning, so you can review it. And if you missed it or your friends missed it, they can watch it on demand as well. Again, thank you. And with that, I want to say enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.